Hello, everybody. It's Hawka. It's Pickem time. It might be 1 a.m. in the UK, so I am keeping it down slightly, but I'm excited for the Pickems. And you know what? Let's not waste any time. Let's jump into it with the first team who I'm picking to make it through. It is going to be G2. Listen, there's a few teams here that are very safe. G2, super solid. You've got Nico, you've got Munisi, you've got Huxley. Maybe they lose a couple of BO1s, but they'll be fine when it gets to the BO3s. And that's a similar vibe for FaZe. Listen, FaZe are a team who, again, have not done that well in the Swiss at the RMR, but you'd be a fool not to pick them here. They're just so well rounded as a team, and they're the sort of team that will step up towards the big events, you would assume, and especially once it gets to BO3s, I don't think they'll make the same mistake as last time, losing against B&E. B&E are a team that have a specific style that can catch you off guard, and I think FaZe have hopefully learned from that coming into this sort of event, because there is a lot of stacked teams here, so there's no real room for error. Next, I think I will go with a couple more teams that I think are fairly safe. I do think Mals are going to be good enough. I think they're not in the best form right now, but they weirdly have a good bit of experience. Exertion has looked very good in a couple of games, which is always great for BO1s. And they just have enough of a backbone and enough structure as a team. Even if they keep things simple, often on their T side, they will be good enough to make it through this stage, at least in my opinion. Next, I'm going to go with Liquid. Again, they're another team where, have they been in the best form lately? Probably not. However, at the same time, they just have that class about them where you expect them to be able to deal with the pressure. And I think the fact that it's the last CSGO major might affect teams a little bit, but I don't think it will be as big a factor as it's going to make teams super fall off, right? And some of these teams who are just stacked across the board, I do think will do well. Liquid didn't have the best RMR, but listen, they've got super solid pieces across the board. Just in terms of firepower, I do expect players like Elige to step up, even if he has been a bit up and down in recent months. And that backbone of having Elige, Yakinda, Naf, that alone should be enough to see them through this stage, realistically. Next, I am going to go with Ents. I really like where Ents are at right now. I think swapping out Valda for Nertz made a lot of sense. Nertz looks very legit. I think he almost always shows up for this team. And I will also say that even though Snappy's style in the past was a little bit basic, he would often just call out a spawn, it seems like that was something he kind of had to do with his previous lineups, whereas now he seems at least a little more comfortable to give the players some room to make their own decisions, which is quite nice. Nertz is definitely one of those players. I think Sampius is a very good lockdown AWPer on CT side. And I just generally like the trajectory for this team overall. So I like where Ants are at. I think they've got a lot of positives about them, and I just like the position they're in right now. I think they're moving upwards at a good time. They've made this roster move a little bit before the major, so it has enough time to sink in, and so they're constantly growing their playbook, and that means I expect them to do pretty well at this stage. Now, for these final two spots, I think there's a few teams you can consider. I'm looking at NIP and OG as big names who I think are doing pretty well lately, but also could maybe be susceptible to an upset. I think Fours are a pretty solid team who definitely are going to cause some upsets at this stage. Jerry always seems to find a way to make some upsets happen. They play this weird offbeat style where if you don't prepare well for them, they're going to cause you some issues. But I don't know if I believe enough in them to put them through. You have Monty. This is a team that have a lot of firepower, and especially Boros is brilliant. As an aggressive rifler, this guy is genuinely up there with the best of them. At the RMR, he was carrying against top teams, and weirdly enough, a player like Waro2k, who was pretty hyped up for these guys, actually didn't do too well at the RMRs. He was doing way better in the online events they played, but the rest of the squad were good enough, and the calling was, again, pretty basic. But when you have very skilled players, that basic calling style and just Boros opening up rounds can be really effective. So when I say basic, that's not a bad thing. It's just basic but effective. And then finally, you can consider complexity and pain here. I think I believe a bit more in Pain. They're a pretty solid team. They have Big Uzera as their caller now, and he's a good fragger and an IGL. He used to be a star player, switched to a rifler. He oftentimes calls lurking away from the rest of his team. And then you have Zevi and Skulls, who are very good pieces. I just don't know if they quite have enough to make it through this stage. And Complexity, I mean, they might have a higher ceiling based on what they did at Katowice, but I'll be honest, I don't fully believe in Hulzerk. I think Katowice might have been a bit of a standout performance for him that he won't be able to live up to. I do think Grim is very good as a rifler, but then Fang hasn't super impressed me. JT's calling is fine, but nothing exceptional and not good enough to bring some of these slightly lower quality players up to the level where I can expect them to make it through. And so I'm actually going to end up going with OG first. I think OG have surprisingly been pretty solid still with their overall cohesion and cooling, even after Nexa has left the team. Nico's done it and done a really solid job. And initially, it was pretty simplistic stuff. It was grouping up early. It was a lot of similar stuff that Nexa was calling. But now I do see some rounds where they have players lurking. They're a little more comfortable in the mid round. And so I think things are moving in the right trajectory for me to pick this team going forward. And then for me, between Monty and NIP, I'm actually going Monty. I think this team you could really consider for 3-0. And I do want to discuss this quickly. Monty's individuals and just their ability to pop off could really allow them to go 3-0 and just do very well in the BO1s. It kind of depends whether you're willing to take that risk, considering they're going against FaZe first round. And I also think they're genuinely a really solid team to go through. It's not like they slowed down once they got into the RMRs, into the BO3s, right? Like, they were still fine in the BO3, which was the thing I was concerned about. Because I thought, okay, they've caused a few BO1 upsets. That's fine. That's all well and good. I don't know how they'll do in the BO3. They lost against Heroic, but they played Heroic really close on both maps. And Heroic are a team who don't have low lows, right? Heroic are the team that have the best floor in the scene right now. Even when Heroic are playing badly, they're still a very good tier 1 team. And then they beat Fours, made it through, lost against Vitality. We can accept that. But beating Fours 2-0, pretty solid result. Losing close against Heroic also gives me props in them. I think they know exactly how to play with their players, and they've had a few good players in the past that they've ended up cutting. So that suggests to me they're making sure their players can all work together, and I do believe that this team has the right 5 right now to work together in a good way, even if Waro as an AWP IGL isn't exactly popping off right now. You've just got to believe, in my opinion, that Boros, based on what he did at the RMR, can continue, and this team can make it through. That means I'm not having NIP here, weirdly, because for my 3-0 team, I'm going with Fords. I think this is a team that can definitely pop off and cause some upsets. Jerry's style is just very uncomfortable for teams to play against. He'll often throw in these rounds where there's maybe 4 players on one side of the map, 4 players on the other side, and just make things very awkward for the opponents. And that's the sort of thing that might cause you 1 or 2 early upsets. You might get on a roll. They're a team that I think have a pretty high, but their low could also be low. And that's why we go for them in the 3-0, because you don't want to pick your favorites to go 3-0, because you get 1 point for every single thing here. So why would I not just choose G2 and FaZe down in the section where they just advance, because then I guarantee my point, realistically. Whereas if they lose an awkward BO1, then I'm in trouble. Final decision here, 0-3. Weirdly, the least important one. I feel like a lot of people know it's hard to predict who's just going to cause one random upset, so 0-3 is difficult. Here are the 3 teams I think you choose between. Fluxo, Mongols, Greyhound. I think Greyhound have a pretty solid backbone and structure as a team, especially on like Inferno, for example. Inz is very good at calling on that map, and so I think once it comes to the BO3, I could see this team doing pretty well. I think also they did pretty well at Melbourne recently, so I wouldn't pick this team. I could see them getting at least 1 win, maybe even 2. Fluxo and Mongols. This is the interesting coin flip, because I think Mongols are for sure the better team in terms of team cohesion, in terms of how they call the game. I like what they do a lot of the time. Fluxo are a team who are just going to run at you early in the round, and if you're not ready for that, they can upset you in a bust of 1. They could get off to a really good start and just roll off to such a strong lead that you're too far behind. But I just think that Fluxo's individuals aren't quite good enough to make that style super effective at this sort of stage. Whereas Mongols, I've seen them do a similar thing where when they know they're underdogs, they'll take a few risks. They'll group up earlier in a round, and it's worked for them. Whereas Fluxo, I have much less faith in. I've seen Mongols beat Cloud9. I've seen them beat Furia. Fluxo are a team who didn't even beat anyone good in the RMR to get here. They haven't beaten good teams over in South America recently. They've even taken some losses. And yes, they could be scary in a BO1 because they will just run at you early in the round. And if you're not ready for that, that could cause the upset. So that's the question here. Do Fluxo cause a random upset, even though they may be slightly worse than Mongols? Or do you pick Mongols because they're probably not a great team here and they probably don't have as much upset potential? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Personally, I'm going with Fluxo. I'm locking this in. And as always, pick for yourself. Listen to my opinion, but don't literally follow me, okay? I don't want you to feel bad if you don't get that diamond coin in the last major. Let me know your picks. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and let's get into the major, boys. I cannot